So, hello everyone. Welcome to the School District Roundtable. This is our second iteration of the roundtables that we're having on COVID-19 related impacts, financial and related impacts. It's part of our Fiscal First Aid series. We did the first one of this almost exactly 2 months ago, where we had, in that case, we had 5 districts talk more about their experiences in terms of what they were seeing at that point in time. Things were even a little more fluid at that point, if that's the best descriptor for it, with us being either right at the start of school for folks who start early, kind of in the game, or still trying to figure out how exactly we were going to get started for still a lot of the districts. And again, some of that uncertainty still exists today, but starting to have things settle down a little bit, I think, in terms of kind of getting through the first quarter or so, and trying to kind of figure out where to go from there. And that's really leads us to today's presentation. So on the line today, and here's the agenda just real quick. I'll just hit on the hyperlink that we have out there for the Fiscal First Aid for school districts, and the information that's there, that's readily available, GFOA member or not. You can download that and access that. Then we're gonna have our roundtable with folks. And then again, there's the poll that I mentioned earlier in terms of being sure to answer those questions too. So, and then the last thing too, like I mentioned earlier, we'll have this code word that you'll have to type into the learning management system, into gfoa.org/learn, to actually earn your CPE certificate at the conclusion of the webinar as well. So that's something a little bit new. So just be sure to pay attention to that at the end, and I'll make sure I post that up into the chat function as well as we go through this. So first things first here, just Fiscal First Aid. We put this piece out about 2.5 months ago now. Just some recommendations, both short and near term, or short and long term, for things to consider, things to think about a little bit as you're both trying to serve kids as best as possible in terms of this school year, this fiscal year, and then also too starting to think more about the long-term type of impacts as well. Since we know that even if we might have realized a little bit of savings from closing last year, or the books closed out pretty good for last fiscal year, it's probably not looking all that great in terms of state funding in particular, and other type of financial impacts. And how do we start to think through a little bit of that now, before we get to that edge of that fiscal cliff, so to speak. So again, if you haven't seen that, if you're interested in taking a look at that, again, that's freely available. Whether or not you're a GFOA member, doesn't matter. You can download and take a read through that and access the information there. So on to kind of the bulk of it here. So really happy to have the group of panelists that we have today. I've worked with all of them for a number of years now. All of their districts and them have been a part of our Alliance for Excellence in School Budgeting. At some point in time, in one fashion or another, have done presentations for us and have done a lot of great work, some of which you can actually find and download from our Smarter School Spending website as well. So we have on the line today 2 folks from the School District of Palm Beach County. We have Mike Burke, their Chief Financial Officer. Then we have Heather Knust, their Budget Director. And then from the School District of Fort Atkinson in southern Wisconsin, we have Jason Demarath. He's their Director of Business Services / CFO. Probably a couple of other titles like we all know and have there too. And then finally, and last but not least, we have Chris Wildman from North Shore School District, just outside of the city of Chicago, where GFOA is headquartered, and he's their CFO. So really happy to have them today. And what we're going to do is each one of them have a slide with a couple of bullets on it. They're going to talk for a couple minutes on that, and then we're going to flip over the polls and talk a little bit more about some of the things that you're typing in, react to some of that a little bit, and we'll go from there. Really a chance to hear a little bit more about what each of these districts are doing. Then, like I think we mentioned last time around when we did this roundtable, a chance to commiserate and make sure that we're not alone in terms of this endeavor, that we're all working through as best as possible right now. So that said, I went in alphabetical order by district name. So Chris, if you want to kick us off here and talk a little bit about what North Shore has been up to.
Absolutely. I think if somebody would have said to me, hey, what's the biggest challenge of your career? Or what are you most proud of? I might think of, if you would have asked me 9 months ago, I would have said, probably rebuilding our middle schools, probably selling bonds, putting together a long range plan. But if you were to ask me today, I would probably say closing schools and reopening schools is probably the biggest thing that I've definitely done in such a short amount of time and in such a frenetic pace. What I mean by that is, with 3,800 students, 10 schools, we closed in March abruptly. We had to put in some emergency measures to close our schools. And then we basically had to pivot, as you all did, and figure out how to reopen. And I think if I was to talk to myself back then, I'd say there's never enough preparation you can put into reopening of schools, in terms of transportation, in terms of cleaning, in terms of self-certification, in terms of how do you feed your students. I think what the approach that we took here at North Shore School District 112 was to really walk through a student's day. So they get up in the morning, they get on a bus that's been cleaned, takes them to school. They get off the bus, they walk into a school, and they've been self-certified. So we then take them to a classroom that's been cleaned. They then do their work in an AM/PM model. So we use the data to reopen in a hybrid model, which was basically saying that half of our students are in a AM cohort and the rest of them are in a PM cohort for 2 hours, focusing on math, English learning, English language arts, and world languages, because we're a dual language school district. 2 hours of intense synchronous learning. They then walk out the door. We give them their breakfast and lunch for the day, breakfast for the following morning, and then they walk onto a bus that's been cleaned again, and we take them home, and then we do a 2-hour cleaning, high touch points with disinfectant specialists, high touch areas, making sure that everything's okay, and then we bring the PM cohort in, repeating again. So basically, it's been very intense because we basically replicated our school day twice in a day. And the amount of things that need to be put in place to make that happen cannot be understated from a contract perspective, from the CFO. All the different vendors that we work with, so our cleaning specialists, the company that cleans our buildings, the transportation company that brings our kids to school, all needed to be amended. So if I was to look back and say, what's the main thing as a CFO, as a business manager, what do you really need to focus on? You need to focus on the details of the contracts to make sure that this is all in place. As you can see from some of the bullet points here, 85% of our students, we give the option of remote or hybrid. 85% opted for hybrid. So we have 15% out doing remote learning all day, synchronous and asynchronous, both in our elementary and middle schools. And then we have the rest of them coming in the AM/PM cohorts. Again, cleaning, transportation, all the things need to be put in place, that your community feels safe, that they're bringing their students back. And then I think the biggest thing has been making sure that your staff are on board. Your staff have to feel confident that you have risk mitigation for air quality, for cleaning, and that self-certification is going to be followed, and the parents are not going to give their kids ibuprofen and send them to school. That was something we had to deal with, but it's not been evident in any of the issues that we've had. We've only closed for 1 day, one school, and we've been open for about 45 days. So we think it's going very successfully.
Great, thanks, Chris. And do you mind sharing a little bit about some of the interactions with the unions you've had too? Because I know that was kind of interesting. What you shared with me earlier.
We met. So we actually formed a closing committee. Back in March when we closed, I think it was about March 6th we closed. I can't remember, it's hazy right now what day we closed. But we immediately started to meet with our union to talk about closing, to make sure that everything was in place. And then we stopped that closing committee, if you will, became a reopening committee. And because we had been in dialogue, we met with them every week just to talk about the status of reopening. We really built a trust with them. And when we presented our reopening plan to them, they felt good that they'd had input in every way. We also brought in an outside group called the DM group to help us with this. I'm going to put my hand up. I'd never reopened a school in a global pandemic. So any outside help that we could bring in, we used. So we had them come in to be the facilitators. So it wasn't the district that was driving the reopening. It was this outside group. And we had teachers on the reopening committee. We had administrators, clearly. We also had board members too. So everyone was around the table in helping us come up with this hybrid learning model.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Here, let me advance it over to Jason from Fort Atkinson, if you want to talk a little bit more about what you all have been up to, and particularly what's happened in the last week or so with having to close back down. So.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. We're a district of 2,700 students in southern Wisconsin, halfway between Milwaukee and Madison. Just like Chris, we had to close abruptly in March on Friday the 13th. I'll remember that date. And so the springtime, I think, like a lot of us, was kind of survival and trying to do everything we can to keep some kids engaged. But then we spent the summer working on what our teaching and learning model would be for this year. And we developed a model that we're calling mirrored learning, which we allowed our parents to choose between full virtual or full in-person. So kids were here 5 days a week, every day, and we had about 75% come in person and 25% stay full virtual. But our mirrored learning model was basically through Zoom. You had the kids in the classroom, you had the smart board up front, and the teacher with a microphone, earpiece, and then the kids at home on the smart board, and the smart board was their computer screen, and they were all interacting together. So we opened that model on September 3rd, but we had to transition everything to full virtual as of September 21st. So we were open for just under 3 weeks. And that was due to county metrics. Our local county adopted the Harvard model and made recommendations on when we should go full virtual or hybrid and those kinds of things. And we hit the numbers that forced us to go full virtual on September 21st. So we have actually been in full virtual this entire time now since September 21st. Some of the things we've done along the way, probability modeling. There's a firm that GFOA has their national projections for COVID-19 probability up on GFOA's website. We engaged that same firm to do some probability modeling for us on when we might be able to reopen. And we started that project in late August, thinking it'd be nice to know when we'll hit those county metrics and be forced to close so that we see it coming and we can give people a heads up and we can plan. And on this, and now that we're closed, it's the other way. We're looking for when we can reopen so we can start planning, as opposed to right now, our county updates their county dashboard at 2 p.m. every day, and we're sitting there clicking refresh, waiting to see what happens to the numbers. We now get, a good week or week and a half heads up of when we might be able to see those numbers get to a place where we'll be able to reopen, or the rest of the year once we do reopen, if we'll have to close. So from the finance side, we've been a part of GFOA's Smarter School Spending since 2015. And since then, we've built some processes here that our entire administrative team this spring discussed budgeting issues. We all, as a group, looked at what the long-range projection was, what we were hearing from the state for funding, and what we would do. And everybody came to consensus that we just stopped purchasing this spring and carried over everything we could to this year, knowing that we're going to be spending it on plexiglass and other PPE and who knows what else, if it would have to be a continuation of wages in some form or whatever it might be. Our team worked together to determine, and right now we're working together to determine what we spend those carryover funds that were carried over on, as well as what we spent the CARES Act funds on. One of the challenges that we were facing before we ended up closing down due to metrics was, if metrics don't close us, will staff quarantines and staffing issues and those kinds of things get us to a point where we won't be able to staff our programs. And so we had a positive case here, a positive case there that ended up quarantining some people. And we were fine up until we got closed by the full county metrics. But I know just this past Friday, district around us that was still open had to close and go virtual because they couldn't staff programs anymore, and it was just due to community spread. It wasn't transmission in the schools. So it was just happening out there, and there were too many positive cases and quarantines to be able to sustain programming. So that was one of the challenges that we were starting to wrestle with. From our perspective, we're treating this as a disruption to the status quo, and we're putting in models that we're looking at changing our educational model, not going back to where we were. One of the things we did to develop that mirrored learning was we built a teacher leader team that we called One Forward Success Team that put together this mirrored learning model and rolled it out to all their colleagues and trained them and got all the technology set up and to implement the best practices. So we're treating this as we go, as we're not going back to what we were before. We're going to be something different when we come out on the other side of this.
Great. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate that. And for those of the folks that are interested in some of that modeling that he had mentioned that they were doing with GFOA, you can actually view the webinar. I think we did, probably 2.5, 3 weeks ago now. It's posted up on the GFOA YouTube channel. So if you're looking for something to view outside of cat videos or something else to make you happy, you can listen to Jason talk a little bit more about COVID modeling with some other folks from GFOA and some outside people as well in terms of how that was done. So thank you. And last but not least, advance the slide here. We have Heather and Mike from Palm Beach County, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the trials and tribulations you all have been going through, particularly as it comes from the bigger school district perspective as well. So,
sure, thanks, Matt. So yeah, in Florida, school districts are independent, but our boundaries align with the county. So you have 67 counties across the state. We're the 5th largest district in Florida, but we're the 10th largest in the whole nation. So we've got some pretty big districts down in Florida, particularly in South Florida with Dade and Broward as well. We've got about 175,000 kids across 180 schools, and that excludes about 22,000 kids in 50 charter schools. And I just listed some of our more popular cities. There's a tremendous wealth divide in Palm Beach County. We go everywhere from Palm Beach Island, which you have billionaires, out to the west to the Glades region, which is around Lake Okeechobee, and it's an agricultural community. And there's some really extreme poverty, as well as in some of our inner cities, like the Riviera Beach is more like in the urban corridor. So we have 60% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. So sometimes I have to explain that. People think Palm Beach County and they just expect us to have a lot of money, but actually we're a very diverse county, and we're about 1/3 African-American, 1/3 Hispanic, and about 1/3 white students, roughly. So we've, all the comments I've heard earlier, same here, right? We shut down March 13th as well, and we pivoted to distance learning. It went okay. There wasn't a lot of structure around it. We had not gotten to a 1-to-1 device ratio yet. We had students that could not connect, that just didn't have internet access in their homes. And our teachers did their best to kind of make do in a tough situation. So we spent a lot of time over the summer trying to improve distance learning. And I really feel like we have. And we tried to tackle some of those issues. So we made getting a device into every student's hands a priority. We carved out $25 million to advance that project. And we started ordering computers as quick as we could. And we've gotten a lot of them in, but we are still waiting on about 34,000 more computers to come in. And we're getting by okay because we have at least that many kids. We have about 50 or 60,000 kids that have their own device just because their family has the means to provide it. But we're rounding that out. Florida's in kind of a unique situation. We saw with the COVID and the outbreak and the cases, South Florida was more of a hot spot than the rest of the state. And we have governor and state leaders that were very interested in having schools reopen as fast as possible. And we had a series of executive orders, and one that actually forced us to provide a brick and mortar 5-day-a-week option to families that were interested. And we did get some allowance to push that back until the conditions in our county, the health conditions and the cases and all that allowed for it. But even that was a really dicey situation, because initially we were told to work with our local health department, and then the health department was told later that they were not to opine on this. So it was kind of an awkward situation there. But anyway, we opened up on August 31st, 100% virtual. And then we had to kind of comply with the governor's order, and we ultimately offered that brick and mortar option on September 21st. We had done some surveys, but we really weren't sure how many kids were going to come back. And we expected about 50% to come back. Only about 32% actually showed up. And 68% of our students are remaining online. And we were pretty flexible at the beginning. We allowed families to make that choice from 1 week to the next with a week's notice if they wanted to shift back and forth. That did not work out well. And we had kids that were shifting back and forth on a daily basis, particularly the high school kids. So now we've brought some more structure to that. And as we get ready for our second 9 weeks of school, we're forcing families to make a choice for that 9-week quarter. And they're going to have to stick to that unless they have some type of extreme hardship. You know, our enrollment's way down. I don't think that's unique to most districts across the country. About a large number of our kindergarten kids that we were expecting just did not show up. We've seen more kids go to virtual school, home education, some private schools, some charters, but not to a real significant extent. So this enrollment decrease of 7,300 has got our full attention. That's about $60 million in revenue for us. And our governor, as part of that executive order that we had to comply with, that we wanted to protect our funding, he's committed to holding districts harmless for the first half of the year on our funding. And we're real anxious to see how that plays out, because the mechanics of that calculation haven't been shared with us yet. One thing we struggled with was the, you know, there's a lot of empathy for our workforce, but when you're faced with the reality that you have to open your doors and receive students, you know, you need to bring people back to the buildings. And that's something we struggled with a little bit. And there's been a lot of pressure from our teachers union and our own board to say, to really free up as many teachers as possible to work remotely. And that's been a challenge for our principals as they build their schedules. And we've got about 550 plus teachers as of this point that we've allowed to work remotely. And we hope to add to that to some extent as parents solidify their choice around either remote or virtual education. And we're spending a boatload of money on, we saved about 26 million last year. We're about $50 million in this year for PPE, you know, enhanced cleaning, more computers, training, all that good stuff. And our financial future is looking a little dicey. Florida's economy has been hit pretty hard. Although if you listen to our state leaders, you know, they seem incredibly optimistic about a rapid recovery. But we're seeing, you know, a sizable budget hole in probably, you know, in FY22 for certain, and potentially maybe even mid-year. So we're following what's going on at the federal level very closely. And Heather, what I missed, you know, we're such a big county, it takes two of us. That's why Heather and I are both here today.
Hey, Mike, just for perspective, could you just, the 550 teachers or Heather, what's your total number of teachers, just for kind of percent, you know, of folks who are working remotely for your teaching staff?
Yeah, that's about 4 or 5%. We have 12,500 classroom teachers. So it's not a huge percentage when you look at 68% of kids in person, but you know, when you look at a high school schedule with 7 periods and the complexity of those student schedules, offering them all those choices, and then when you're trying to, you know, figure out who can be remote and who needs to be in their classroom, it's tough. And we are also doing the synchronous learning, where we've got teachers in their classroom teaching both kids in front of them and kids that are online. We were fortunate we had bought smart panels previously for our classrooms as part of a referendum. So the smart panels and the microphones and the cameras are all paying off.
Yeah, and the only thing that I was going to add is related to our enrollment being down so significantly at 7,300. We're used to doing a normal count day process. So 11 days into the school year, we normally do our staffing adjustments. So our enrollment was down a few thousand at that time. And we decided that we wanted to wait and try to give enrollment time to stabilize before we went in and made those staffing adjustments. So we waited until October, which is the month our funding is based on from the state. And it was actually, we could see our enrollment declining even more. It wasn't actually getting any better. So then we were challenged with, okay, the state is saying they're going to hold us harmless. We really don't know what that means. So what is our count day adjustment actually going to look like? Because normally, because we're such a large district, we just run the numbers and the adjustments are what they are. But you know, having this potential hold harmless out there and just the challenges that the schools are having to face with this fluid situation with the students, we really wanted to take a kinder and gentler approach, which is not something that we finance people are necessarily known for. I'm fortunate to have worked for Mr. Burke, so he does have that personality. And so we're now doing a customized approach, and we're meeting with every single one of our schools over the next 4 days. And we actually started this morning at 7:30, and we have 15-minute meetings. We have 2 breaks today. We had 2 meetings, and this is one of our breaks for the day. But we're meeting with over 160 schools over the next 4 days, and really just trying to work with the schools, you know, take some units back, but we still want to make sure that they're able to service the kids. One of the things I'm worried about is Title I comparability and making sure we're still able to comply. Because we're noticing more stability in our Title I schools in enrollment compared to our non-Title schools. And so that's something that, you know, we'll be looking at once we get through these budget adjustments, making sure those schools we let keep more than they should have don't throw our Title schools out of compliance.
Yes, I had to dig deep and muster up some compassion. It was not easy, but thanks.
I didn't know Mike was bringing you as the heavy for this one, Heather. So, and thanks for taking your break to join us on this one. I really appreciate it.
Actually, Mike has been in all the meetings so far, so he's going to be attending just as many as he can. And I mean, we have the whole team. We have the chief of HR is on the call. We have the deputy superintendent. So there's more people than usual than I'm used to having on these calls, but Mike did tell them they all have to be quiet because there's only 15 minutes. So there's no introductions, and we just get in there, get it done, and move on to the next school.
Oh, that does not sound like fun necessarily. Just want to kind of ask Chris and Jason with Heather and Mike talking a lot about enrollment too, you know, more from the kind of more average and a little bit more mid and small size districts. Is that something that you've seen a lot with enrollment changes as well? And how does that come into play with a little bit with the state funding as well and some concerns with that before we get to the polls here?
You want to go first, Jason?
Sure. We're down about 100 kids this year out of our 2,700, 2,800. We were expecting a decline because our 4K class last year was really quite small, and we didn't see any increase as they came into kindergarten this year. But we did have so what happened here was our county had some other metric that they were using this summer, and we hit that metric in late August to not be able to open in person. And so we announced that we were starting virtually, and then 2 or 3 days later, the county changed the metric and adopted different metrics. And adopted the Harvard model. And within that, we were able to open. But during that time, there was obviously an outcry of parents wanting to have their kids come in person. We did see requests for kids to enroll in other districts. We've seen some kids go to private schools, but we've also heard that homeschooling, and I've seen surveys in our area in southern Wisconsin as well, and everybody seems to be down, and nobody's really saying it's an exodus to private schools or anything like that. I don't know if they're homeschooling or where all the kids are going for now. That's one thing that I think will be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, we've seen a small drop. It's mainly been in our early childhood, because I think a lot of the parents of younger children just wanted to keep them at home. So that's the main area that we've seen a slight decrease in enrollment. We did give an option, hybrid learning or remote learning. So we had 15%. We've actually sent out another survey just to say, hey, we don't want to hold you to this all year. And we're seeing probably a 3% of that 15%, 3% want to come back. So we've not seen a big leap from those who made the initial request saying, hey, I would like to keep my kids home because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. We've not seen everybody just rush back into the buildings. We've only seen a 3% move back to our hybrid learning model, which is, again, they'll rejoin the AM or the PM, and that's across our elementaries and middles.
And just to follow up on that, I saw a Q&A in there, funding. Our student count was right before we closed in September. That affects our state funding, our revenue. In Wisconsin, we have a revenue limit that basically dictates how much we can raise between taxes and state aid. And that's largely based on a rolling 3-year student enrollment average. I know there's a bill that's been talked about at the state level here to hold harmless on enrollment because everybody's seeing the decline, but I don't know that that'll be going anywhere.
I'm pretty lucky that my district relies between 89 and 90%, depending on what year you look at the data, from local property taxes, and that has no impact on enrollment has no impact on that calculation. So state funding and federal funding is only 10% of the revenue here in Highland Park, Highwood, and Fort Sheridan. They're the towns that we serve. So if we do see a dip in enrollment, does it cause a problem from a property tax perspective indirectly? Maybe yes in a future referendum, but no, the district will not see a decrease in revenue directly.
Great. So while you all were sharing more about the enrollment, I pulled up the first poll here, and I'm sorry this is a little bit off-centered. I had it fixed the last time I did a webinar, but my fix did not work this time around, so I apologize for the technical glitch on this one. But is there anything, kind of for the better that you've seen? I mean, I was happy to hear Jason's response in terms of rethinking how instruction is delivered as a part of this. I mean, is there other kind of positives that either Jason that you've seen in addition to that, or Chris or Mike or Heather, in terms of kind of conversations, discussions, or just in general how things have gone?
Yeah, there's one story that sticks with me that I think basically illustrates how we're thinking about things, and that's we did bring in some. So when we were open, we had some special needs students here, and there was one kiddo at an elementary school that has always, for some reason, been terrified about going to art class and would not go. And in this model, that kid, the teacher that services that kid, was able to take that kid aside and put him in the Zoom with the rest of the art class. And it was the first time that kid had ever attended an art class in elementary school. So I guess that's an example of how maybe we look at things a little differently going forward.
I'm sure if you were to ask my curriculum colleagues here at 112, they would tell you that we've made huge leaps in terms of our e-learning model. Did we have an e-learning model in place back in March? We had something, but it was nothing as robust as what it is right now. So in terms of what we have in place to deliver remote learning for the future, definitely huge leaps and strides. At what cost? Huge financial cost, definitely, and a huge investment in thought leadership in delivering on that. But so yeah, definitely there's been some areas, good things that have come out of the global pandemic. It would have been nice to have a little bit more time to think of it over the summer though.
I'd like to share, we struggled in the spring. We knew we had about 15,000 or more students that just didn't have internet access. And we partnered with our county government, and they have some fiber throughout the county that we're able to leverage and put antennas on our schools and kind of light up communities. So it's a municipal Wi-Fi project, and the county's kicked in like 10 million of their own dollars towards this. Our school board went ahead and contracted with Comcast and T-Mobile to make sure that we could provide free internet to the families in need when we restarted the school year. So that's been kind of a positive surprise, where we feel like it's really a societal issue that just came under, a light got shined on it in the spring, and we're trying to do something about it.
Yeah,
Right,
I would definitely
Go ahead.
echo that. We definitely made some worthwhile investments in our technology. I would definitely agree with that.
And I'm going to flip to the next poll here too. So on the flip side of this, what is the biggest challenge or the most surprising challenge that occurred in your response to the pandemic or in responding to the pandemic? Obviously there's a whole host of challenges in terms of unexpected, unprecedented, whatever other cliched term we've all heard and been using over the last couple of months. But if something really kind of comes to mind, so yeah, people not wanting to come back to work, which I think I've talked with Mike and Heather about, and Chris as well, and I'm sure Jason's had some of those challenges. Anything else that kind of pops up in mind, or maybe a specific challenge in terms of how surprising that might have been in terms of the staffing related challenges that you all had?
I just wrote down two things. I put the human element to this because everything that comes across our desk is revolving around either a staff member or a student and that student's family. So the pandemic really is so overreaching and kind of pervasive in how you have to handle it from the business office. You really have to remember that these are human beings' lives. That they're the community members who have their own issues, before the pandemic, and now they're struggling with everything that's going on with your school district. So I just think there has to be a level of compassion and grace that you have to remember with all your decisions. And then I think the second thing I would say is the amount of detail that's needed in being able to pull this off, being able to open and stay open. It's difficult. And if it was easy, we'd all be the same. Every district would be full in person, and we wouldn't be talking right now about this, but that's not the case. So I think it just takes a huge amount of team effort and just resilience every day that you are reassessing, looking at data, and making the best decision for you and your community.
I'd say my end, one thing that I'm sure we're all dealing with is the student nutrition food service aspect of things. And I'll give my team all the credit in the world. They turned around within 2 days this spring and were delivering meals and doing pickups. And we have 2,700 kids. We were serving 2,800 meals a day between breakfast and lunch being delivered to people's houses this spring. But the way it flips back and forth, like with the USDA guidance at the end of August, and then being able to continue what we were doing, and then we had to flip to virtual over the course of a day or two this fall. So going back and forth, and then when you have the hybrid model too, you have not only do you have the kids in school eating, like we had when we have 25% of our kids at home, we had to also offer that option for kids to come and get food at the building along with serving those in school. So my team's handled it great, but that has been a huge challenge that's flipped back and forth.
Yeah, this probably shouldn't have been a surprise. I don't think it was, but our biggest challenge is just staffing. We've had teachers that have elected to resign or retire or just take their sick leave. If they've accrued sick leave over the years, they're taking it now. And so coming up with enough substitute teachers to cover their classes is an ongoing challenge for us. And, we're working through that. But that's just that's got to be playing out, I guess, on a bigger scale across the country. But substitute teachers do not make a whole lot of money, and it's hard to get them in there now to, in these conditions.
I think one thing that struck me from when I was talking to Chris about doing this webinar was I liked how you phrased it in terms of you all had a kind of a single driver and focus to actually open on day one, and how you thought that in terms of some of your peers, specifically in the suburbs of Chicago here, that was still something that they were struggling with a little bit if that wasn't kind of a singular focus. And I found that pretty interesting, having that kind of, that reaching for what the end goal was, as opposed to getting a little more stuck in kind of the nitty gritty, so to speak.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to close, right? You can think of any reason to close your school, but the main reason to be open is because you think your students learn best in that environment. So as long as you have the risk mitigation in place and you can tell your community, you know, we feel like your students, your children belong here, and we can look after them, and everything can be as safe as possible. That was something that we strived with. You know, we put that at the forefront of all our communications. We felt that reopening was very important to us. Reopening in a hybrid model. I just want to be very clear on that. We're not full in person. So that was kind of the middle path that we took. And once we'd made that decision, we built everything around that. And like I said earlier, the devil's in the detail on this. It really is about making sure that you have all those contracts in place, you have all your vendors in place, and really thinking about how do you stay open once you're open. You know, self-certification for those third-party vendors. I mean, that was not something that I was thinking about several months ago, but what if the people who you trust to come into your buildings and do what they do in a normal course of business, whether it's feeding your kids, cleaning your buildings, how do they not bring COVID in? You know, so that's the level of thought you really need to bring to this, that once you do actually reopen, you really want to stay open.
I'm going to flip to the next poll here. See if it pops up here.
I actually just have a question. I'd be interested to know why Chris's district decided to go with an AM PM versus every other day. So with 85% of our students of our families opting for the hybrid model, it wasn't possible to have that many kids in person versus doing an alternate day schedule. We also said as well that if we do that, we don't touch our kids every day. And that was a key thing about, you know, as I just talked in the previous discussion, you know, we wanted to open, but we wanted to open every day because we feel that consistency is important for our families. So if you have a kindergartner who is doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday remote, Thursday remote, back in the school Friday, how is that a consistent model for that student? So we kind of shied away from that, and we said that we wanted to do an AM PM because that was the best educational model that we could bring. As you can see from my financials, it's clearly been the most expensive because I have additional cleaning, I have additional transportation, and all the other things that have been put in place. So that's why it was from an educational perspective.
So up on the screen now, I have the poll about what are you currently enacting or discussing to help start talking about or addressing some of those longer term financial impacts of the pandemic. You know, any other kind of thoughts on that right now from anyone else, or is it really just kind of seeing what the state is going to do, or what reassurances they've made, even though you might be a little skeptical in terms of those reassurances?
You know, so we worked through the Great Recession, and with, you know, I feel like we're heading right back into like the perfect budget storm of declining enrollment, expected state revenue shortfalls, you know, rising costs related to COVID-19. So we've, you know, first thing we do is kind of stop hiring, right? And we try to leverage attrition to right size our budget to the extent possible. And you have to make exceptions to that. We have a waiver process, and the work that Heather's doing this week to kind of reset on our staffing allocations is critical. So right now everything's frozen. We'll make sure, we think we can place all of our employees. Some people may have to change schools, but we're hoping to avoid layoffs, and then just be very, you know, smart about only reopening hiring when absolutely needed, so that we can just start, you know, leveraging those savings that come with natural attrition. And attrition's on the way up, unfortunately. Just with COVID, there's people that are reconsidering this line of work, and we're going to try to use that to our advantage to start bringing down our expenses.
And
Go
I was just
ahead.
going to also mention too, just real quick, that we also need to figure out a way to attract these students back that we lost. You know, are they just gone for 1 year? or do we really have to rethink, how we deliver instruction in order to attract them back?
Here in Wisconsin, we're in a place where we get our state numbers for this year at the end of this week, and then set our budget here in the next couple of weeks before the end of October. And then from there, I run the the 5-year financial projections, and we have a conversation as an admin team and a board. But along the way, I think, as I mentioned before, the entire admin team's been involved in strategizing what we're going to do, and how we're going to handle things longer term. Some of the maybe nitty gritty detail stuff. Now that we're all virtual, we have some support staff that maybe don't have all the work they would normally have to fill their hours, but some of them have volunteered that, hey, you know what, I'd rather be home with my kid who's at home learning right now anyway. So we've allowed those kinds of things to kind of save here and there as we can as well.
Great. Just since we're getting a little bit closer to the top of the hour here, I'm going to flip it to the next poll here. And this one talks about what Jason had mentioned earlier on. This one looks like it's working this time. Great. Oh, I flipped too far though. Hold on. Oh, and then of course it goes back to not presenting it rightly, correctly. Hold on, there we go. It looks like sorry about that. The one poll is not showing up like I was hoping it would. So, or one other poll got skipped over. So it's fine though. So sorry about that. So this one just asks, what can GFOA do to help support you and your district in challenges related to the pandemic and beyond? And sorry, the one poll that didn't show up properly, and again, apologies for that, is talking about kind of the long-term changes that you might see in terms of delivery of instruction, what things that you're going to be trying to get out ahead of in terms of, God forbid, something like this happens again, or, what can you use and leverage or lessons learned from how we've done instruction differently over the last couple of months here, although it seems like an eternity since I have a virtual learner at home, in terms of what that does. So, I know, Jason, you talked a little bit about some of the stuff that you're thinking in terms of not coming back the same in terms of what you were before. And if you want to detail that a little bit more, or if Chris or Mike or Heather, if you have anything else to kind of share your perspectives on that too, or what conversations you've had.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is that, like Mike had mentioned, we were not a 1-to-1 district. We did place a big order for Chromebooks in May, I think, and we still haven't seen them. But we're able to be 1-to-1 right now with some older ones and filling the gaps with students' devices that they had at home. But I think that will be a game changer in how we move forward. We were planning on doing it, 2-3 years down the road and working to get those devices, but this kind of moved up the timeline to be able to implement all this stuff at once.
Yeah, I think Heather touched on this. Our families have gotten a taste of virtual learning, and some of them like it, and I think they don't necessarily want to be in a full virtual environment. I think having that hybrid of like a connection to their home school, sports, whatever, but then having the flexibility that virtual ed provides. I think that's something we have to continue to work on and develop that product just to, to hopefully to bring back some of those students and families. So I just see that's an opportunity. I know we've gotten better at it in just the last 6 months, but I'm sure we can continue to refine that and hopefully provide, other options for families that'll make them, come back to the school district or stay with the district.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything that Jason and Mike just said. It's a huge learning curve in terms of where we were back in March, closing and getting ready to start the new school year, whether it's in a remote, hybrid, or full in person. So huge amounts of things have been learned in many departments, I think, in social emotional learning, in student services, in the teaching and learning department. Clearly huge things have been learned in the delivery of curriculum and how we do that. And as Mike just said, some kids like being remote. Some kids don't do as well as maybe others. So it's a very individual basis, but hopefully we'll come out of this, and when we have a vaccine and we're all back to normal, whatever that means, we can start to put some of those best practices in place for the future.
Great. No, and thanks for everybody for responding to the polls too. Hopefully you found that interesting, and sorry it's not scrolling completely as I would have planned on a screen there. Again, the fun glitches that we're trying to figure out and still work through over these last 9 months or so in terms of doing this, or 6 months, I guess, at this point in time. So, but like I said, we'll send out all those answers so you can see that in terms of what your fellow attendees had to say in terms of their responses. And, we have the commentary on top of that too, and then we'll be able to post a recording up of the session online as well at some point in time too. So just in the last 5 minutes here, I want to flip to the next screen here. So this is the password, so to speak, that I mentioned earlier. And sorry, I have to pull up the instructions here just so everybody knows why we're doing this. So I apologize, my screen flipped over there. So what we need you to do after the session is over here in the next 5 minutes or so is to go back into the learning management system of GFOA, where you access at gfoa.org/learn, and type in this code in terms of this hybrid is the password here. So, and what we're doing is we want everyone to enter the CP verification code. That's what the word hybrid is, to validate your attendance at today's session. After the program is complete, please return to the course landing page in GFOA's learning management system, or gfoa.org/learn, like I mentioned earlier. You will see a verification component for this class. In the text box to the right, you will need to enter the word hybrid, all lowercase as it's presented up on the screen here, and then hit the submit button. If you type that code correctly, you should be good to go. It will unlock and it will award you the CPE credit. So for those of you who might be viewing this as a group setting, maybe you and a few of your colleagues from the district all registered individually, but you decided to watch it together, although I guess these instructions are probably for in the time of when we could actually do that and watch something together. You do need to go in individually into the LMS and each enter the verification codes to make sure each one of you get your own CPE certificate. So, but hopefully we're practicing social distancing or face masking or whatever we're trying to do at this point in time, or having maybe your own personal plexiglass enclosure or something as you walk around your building. So, but just in the last minute or two here, just want to click through the last slide or two. And again, I'll type the code word here. Hybrid is in the chat, so in case you missed that. But just the next slide or two just shares some resources that we have. So the Fiscal First Aid series that we put on when the pandemic was really kind of at its peak back in April and May, we've built upon that. So we have the Balancing the Budget in Bad Times, parts 1 and 2 that walk through long and short-term considerations in terms of how you can start to address some of the financial challenges now. Then we have Fiscal First Aid for the Procurement Office, a piece more about cash flow needs, and then also about paper-based processes in terms of what you can do with that. And that's in addition to that school specific Fiscal First Aid piece that I mentioned at the top of it that we created specifically for school districts, and just some items for consideration and things to think through as you're facing these challenges and starting to try to envision what things will look like in the next several years, since these impacts, I don't think any of us are going to disagree that these impacts are going to be with us for quite some time. Some additional things to think about: Alliance for Excellence in School Budgeting was coming up next month in early November. Heather, Jason, and Chris have all attended meetings of that, have brought folks from their district to it too. It's a great way to collaborate, share, network with people from other districts. We just announced a whole host of the speakers that are going to be there. We're trying to recruit a couple of districts. We're trying to figure out how we do that with everyone's schedules. Seems to be up in the air these days, particularly at the district side in terms of unforeseen circumstances and things that pop up at the last minute. But we have great speakers from Pivot Learning, Education Resource Strategies, District Management Group, Parthenon. We're trying to get somebody from the Participatory Budgeting Group, which is an interesting model as to how I have a more community engaged type of budget as well, to come and do presentations for us. So they have some great topics on social emotional learning and its cost effectiveness, talking more about equity in budgeting as well, which has become an even bigger and more prevalent concern, particularly in these times related to COVID, and then also the trying to address better and having much more robust conversations around systemic racism as well, and how that's impacting budgeting and how we can be more equitable about our allocation of resources. So I think those presentations are going to provide some really great information for that. So you can find that up on our website there. Then also we have a really with our new website, if you haven't seen it, gfoa.org, we have an events calendar which lists out everything that we have, whether you're interested in accounting training, treasury management, debt, and the like, all up there on gfoa.org/events if you're looking for some additional topics. Resources, questions too, again, links to the Fiscal First Aid pieces that I mentioned there earlier, our Smarter School Spending website, which is a whole host of free resources, whether or not you're a GFOA member, doesn't matter. You can find examples from Palm Beach County School District up on the website, examples from Fort Atkinson School District on the website, and I don't think we've gotten anything from North Shore yet, but that's probably coming pretty soon. So all kinds of great things that you can download, and even templates as well that you can take and make your own for free. And there's our best practices, of course, more information from our Federal Liaison Center in DC about coronavirus related legislation and other happenings and other resources that you might find interesting. And I guess I didn't introduce myself at the top. I'm Matt Bubness, if you haven't seen me before. I do a lot of our research and outreach, particularly for school districts. And if you have any questions, there's my contact information as well. So again, I think we're right at the top of the hour. Any closing thoughts from any of our panelists?
Just
Heather and Mike are just ready to get back in those school meetings for sure. So yeah.
Now, I just gotta say, just on top of like just trying to keep a balanced budget, we know we have to also address like this COVID slide, you know, and provide more resources for our kids than ever to try to catch kids back up. So that's just an incredible challenge, I think, and to do it all like through an equity lens.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very key point. So yeah. All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Mike, for taking time out of your break in particular to join us. And also thank you so much to Jason and to Chris for all of your comments. And we'll share those responses that you so kindly typed in as well. And thank you for taking time out of your day. I know that things are always hectic, but things seem to be particularly hectic these days. So thanks for taking the time to be with us. And thanks to everyone again. So take care and stay well.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.